Have you ever wondered what's an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's a way for two or more applications to communicate with each other following certain rules called API specification. Okay, then what's an API client? An API client is a tool that makes it easier for users to explore, test, and debug APIs. It can be a simple terminal script, a console application, or a more complex framework. Basically, anything that allows you to send requests to a set of endpoints can be referred to as an API client. Hello everyone and welcome to this new video on MammaMiaDev. In this episode we'll see how to consume Reddit content by leveraging their API. We will prototype an API client, first using Postman and then with C#, so that we can customize the Reddit experience based on our own preferences. And then, why would you need to create one for Reddit? Technically, you don't really need to create one. You can always use the official website or the mobile application. But as you may or may not know, there was a huge controversy involving Reddit and its APIs in 2023. In short, Reddit decided to move to a paid model for its APIs, which turned out to be unsustainable for third-party applications. Some people protested, Reddit didn't really listen, and most of the applications were forced to shut down, like Apollo, for instance. The rest of the apps had to introduce paid subscriptions to sustain Reddit fees. Okay, so does it mean that I have to pay to use Reddit APIs? Well, yes and no. Every registered app gets a free quota of 60 requests per minute. After that, you have to pay. But that amount of requests should be more than enough for any average user. Just think that Apollo app used to make around 345 requests per day per user. So as long as you have your home credentials, you can use any Reddit client for free up to the API threshold. An example is the Infinity for Reddit client, which is open source, and people also created a Google Colab script to produce a customized version of the app, only for Android at the moment, which uses your own API keys. In this video, we are simply going to see how to build our own custom client, or at least a tiny prototype to use Reddit APIs leveraging the free quota. Just a tiny disclaimer before we move on. It seems that there were cases of users receiving a permanent ban just for using already shut down third-party apps with their own keys. I'm not sure why, but in any case, this video is just for educational purposes. I won't be responsible for any damage caused by inappropriate use of the information shown here. It might sound exaggerated, but you never know. Enough talking, let's move on. First thing you want to do is to stop by the Reddit API wiki page. There you will find links for different resources, like the page to create your first application on the old Reddit interface. Once there, click on Create an App, pick a name, write a short description, choose Web App as application type, and specify a redirect URI. The redirect URI is where the user will be redirected once they authorize the app to access their data. For now, we can just use localhost with a random port. I'll pick 8080 for now, and I will add callback to the URL. Once the app is created, you should find the client ID right under the name and the client secret. We'll need them later when calling the APIs. Oh, by the way, don't waste time trying to use those credentials. By the time this video gets out, they will be already deleted. Now, if you go back to the wiki page, you can read that the endpoints are protected using OAuth. OAuth stands for Open Authorization, and it's a standard designed to allow a website or application to access resources hosted by other web apps on behalf of a user. There are many types of OAuth flows, and the one Reddit uses is called authorization code or authorization grant. There's a great video from ByteByteGo which explains it better. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to have a look. But in short, we are the user who wants to access some protected Reddit content. And we can do it using the app we just created before. The app starts an authorization request by sending the user to the authorization URL, where they are shown what parts of their account the app wants access to, based on the requested scopes. If the user chooses to allow the application, their browser will be instructed to redirect to the app-registered redirect URI. The redirect URI will have an authorization grant or code attached as query parameter. We then use the authorization code to get the access token. This phase is usually called exchange code. And we can use that access token to fetch the Reddit content we need. Now that we had an overview of the OAuth flow, by going back to the API wiki page, you see a link to the API specification. Here you can see all the API methods available on Reddit. For instance, the API/v1/me is the one which gets you the user info. Then subreddits/mine/subscriber gets you the subreddits the user is subscribed to. And then subreddit name/hot can get you the hottest posts from a specific subreddit. Before we move on, don't forget that API have a limit of 60 requests per minute. We can monitor that by checking the response headers. Okay, now let's give it a try using Postman. Here on the right, you can see its main UI. For those who don't know it, Postman is a free tool to build and test APIs. I've already prepared a collection with some requests, which we'll see in a second, and I hope I can find a way to share it with you after this video. Cool. Here on the left, you can see all the requests that I made, and they can be arranged inside folders. Once you click on the request, you can change the details, like the method of the request, the URL, query parameters, the authentication of the request, eventual body, and so on. For the specific request, which is the authorization request, if you remember the previous image that we saw, and you can also read about it on the Reddit OAuth 2 documentation. I'll leave you a link in the description. And this is basically the first step where we send the user to this specific authorization URL. The user has to allow the application to act on his behalf. And to do that, the URL needs to be composed in a certain way with certain parameters, like the client ID, which is the client ID of the application we just created, the response type that needs to be code, a state, which needs to be a unique string, and you can even put information inside the state, the redirect URI. Then we have the duration, which is permanent in this case. The duration indicates whether or not your app needs a permanent token. If it's permanent, then you can use the refresh token to gather a new bearer token every time. So the last one is the scope parameter, and it contains a bunch of values that you can find inside the Reddit API specifications if you arrange them by scope, and it can be account, credits, edit, flare, so on and so forth. And it's basically a scope is an API area that you want to give access to the app. Scopes needs to be space separated. Okay, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but this is just a request placeholder because I'm not going to actually send it. I just need Postman to populate all the variables for me inside the URL. Then I just copy it, paste it inside my browser, and if everything goes well, this is the image that you should see where Reddit is telling you, look, MammaMiaDev, this application is trying to access your account with this access rights. Those are all the scopes that we sent in the scope parameter. You can decline or allow it. Both of them will send you back to the redirect URI. And in this case, we want to allow it. All right, now there is nothing listening on localhost 8080, which is the redirect URI that we specified when we created the application. But if you look closely inside the URL, you can find a state, which is the state that we sent inside the request, and a code. This is ignore the hash symbol at the end. Just take the code without the hash. And this is basically the authorization grant or the authorization code that we were talking about before. Now we'll need this code and use it inside our exchange token request. Now let's just copy it and paste it here. So here on the right, again, we have another request, which is called exchange code. This time it is a post request, always to ready.com, API/v1 access token. So now if we go back to the documentation and we scroll down, yeah, we see all the things that we talked about. There's the token retrieval section, which still talks about the redirect URI. And if we scroll down, here we go, retrieving the access token. So now we've got a code, and we need to use this code and exchange it for a better access token. And we do this by making a post request, sending some values like grant type, which needs to be authorization code, the code we just got, and always the redirect URI. Make sure to properly set up the authentication in this case, which is a basic authentication as specified inside the documentation, and the username will be the client ID, and the password will be the client secret. You can read more on the RFC, I think. Yes, the RFC 2670. Okay, let's give it a try and send this post request. And yes, everything went well, so we received an access token, the token type, which is better, the expiration, and the refresh token. At this point, we have everything we need to call the Reddit APIs and fetch some content. Now, before we move on, let me just quickly talk about the scripts in Postman. So every time you want to send a request, you can set up some automations that can run before the request is sent or after the response is received. Like in this case, after we fire an exchange code, yeah, we want to test that the post request was successful. We want to make sure that the body of the response contains the element access token and the refresh token as well, of course. We parse the body. And after parsing the body, we want to set the access token inside the access token variable in Postman. And the same goes with the refresh token. So every time we fire it, it will automatically populate our variables for us. This way we can reuse them and we don't have to type them manually. Just double check it by going through environment, quick look. Oh yes, variables can be set at global level, or you can create a specific environment in Postman. Creating an environment can have a lot of benefits, like you can switch between one environment and another without having everything inside the global one, which can create confusion. So now we are using this custom environment called Reddit Dev with a bunch of variables that I declared before. And you can see that we got an access token and a refresh token that should match with the response that we just received. Now let's give it a try with the API/v1/me that gives us the user info. Cool. The only at this point the only difference between the previous APIs that we called is that those APIs need to be authenticated using a better token, and the better token is the access token that we just got. And as you can see, given that I declared it as a variable, I just had to specify access token between curly brackets inside the token authentication. And nothing in the headers. This is all automatically populated. Just don't forget that you need to call a different URL at this point, which is oauth.ready.com/API/v1/me. Just hit send, and we should get back a JSON with all the information about my Reddit profile. Nothing secret should be disclosed at this point, but I will check it out after this. Cool. Another endpoint that you can call, which is very useful, is the subreddit/mine/subscriber. Same thing as before, it's a GET request to oauth.reddit.com, and the authentication is a better token one using the access token. So click send, and we receive the response, which looks like this. And if I'm not wrong, I should only be subscribed to only two subreddits. One is should be the the announcement, which is automatic, I think, and the other one should be Avalonia. Yeah, right. You have all the properties, display name, prefix. You can see that it's Avalonia UI. And then, I don't know, just another one endpoint, which can be useful, is the hot one. It's always a GET request, OAuth is the URL, and the path can be r/subreddit name, or I think it can just be hot, if I'm not wrong. Oh, hot, here we go. It's a listing. Yeah, you get the subreddit name is optional. In case you can just use hot in the URL. And if you send it, you always get a listing like before with its children and with a bunch of posts. So unleashing the power across platforms should be a sticky one. And if we close it, the second one, this was created by a user. You can check it out by exploring Reddit using the web interface. Okay, now let's see how we can prototype a quick C# application to call the Reddit APIs. And before we close Postman, let's see one last very cool feature that it has to offer. Let's expand the interface and let's go to the code tab. You can see that you can pick any language that you want, and Postman will show all the required code that you need to fire the selected request. So for instance, if you want to call the API v1 me endpoint, just select the request, go to the code tab, expand it, and here you can see, you can pick the plain HTTP client one or the REST sharp. I'm going with the HTTP client one, and you can see that it's creating a client, it's creating an HTTP request with the right URI. It's adding the authorization URI. The cookies is not really needed, and I think we can even remove it in some way. Yeah, all right, it's auto-generating it for some reason, and then it's sending the request. Now, I've created a small C# application, actually a console application with top-level statements. Oops. That we can use to prototype the Reddit client. Just copy all the code provided by Postman and paste it inside here. So let's check it out. We don't need the cookies. The authorization, so it's the API v1 me, and this is the one that needs the better token. So we need here we go. So we need something like better and some sort of access token like this. Let's declare an access token, and we can copy it from like this, and I think we can copy it directly from the variables. Okay, like this. So we have an access token instantiating the client, the HTTP message with the GET method on the API v1 me. The authorization is better. Send the request, ensure its success, and let's just print the content at this point. So if we run it, photo tree blocked. Yes. Yes, that's because we are missing the user agent. If we go back to the documentation, where they mentioned the rate limit, I think at some point they also mentioned about the user agent, which is this one. Change your client's user agent string to something unique and descriptive, blah, blah, blah. So let's go back to the application. And so let's attach the user agent directly to the client. Client.default request headers. Here we go. Cool. So something like name/version, and this can be a ready test. Let's give it a try again. And yes, it worked. Hello world, by world, and here you can see the payload. Of course, you can do the same by copy pasting the code of each request. You'll probably have to do some changes according to the request, but it should be pretty straightforward in the most cases. And that's pretty much it for this video. Always check the video description for links to all the resources we saw today. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and click on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.